Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life, freedom. Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
Namaskar, hello and welcome to this very special commemoration of the 62nd Punyatithi of India's first Prime Minister, uh, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. He was not just the Prime Minister of the modern Republic of India, but also one of the foremost statesmen and freedom fighters right from 1912 onwards, when he returned back after acquiring his law degrees, a man of privilege, no, I would say, no hiding on that. But then, what he chose, a life of mendicancy and a life of simplicity compared to what he was entitled to by dint of his birth in his own, I would say, regal family for that matter. Today, by way of this commemoration, 27th of May 1964, we lost him in the mortal form. And so he was truly, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru can truly be said as the nation builder, while Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi ji is considered as the father of the nation, who brought about, who somewhere tried to delegitimize the official authority of the British Empire, because he himself was a kind of a barrister who trained into the means and modes of the British imperialism. And while he presented that ideological and the spiritual contest, the challenge, perhaps it was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who was a pupil of Mahatma Gandhi, and he steered through the entire country, all through the freedom struggle. And then from 1947, and especially after Mahatma Gandhi's assassination in 1948, very early on, very early in India's independence, even before the constitution was promulgated in on 26th of January 1950. So Nehru was the unifying force to create, to hold on, I would say, the Indian nation, the modern Indian Republic for that matter. And he carried it out with a lot of grit, with a lot of fascination. There might be a lot of criticism all around in hindsight, but then if we take, I would say, the pedestal of the time, pedestal of the clock, to the circumstances what he inherited after the British has drained India of a proverbial wealth, structurally broken down the entire, I would say, the entire spectrum of the Indian nation into a host of princely states. It was really a tough initial years what Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, I would say, he took the challenge. And this is a part of the Prime Ministers of India series, what Rethink India tries to bring to our community of learners. Because what we somewhere feel that if we have to really understand the modern Indian history, perhaps the biography and the life and times of the occupant of the top political post, the prime minister of the largest democracy on the planet. It needs to be catered to. It needs to be understood in all its nuances, in all its regality, for that matter. So today's commemoration, by way of this commemoration, we would really like to pay our obeisances to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru ji, who was known to be the incorruptible, visionary, ecumenical, and a politician above politics. That are some of the epithets which have been accorded by scholars and commentators of all hues. But then today is his Punyatithi. We would really like to see his contribution from a constructive aspect. Yes, nobody can be perfect, but somewhere for posterity, we have a constructive, positive approach as to we have to understand as to what India was struggling through, how things were managed all through. And so, for the first 17 years of India's independence, the paradox ridden Jawaharlal Nehru. He was a moody, idealist intellectual who felt an almost mystical empathy with the toiling peasant masses. He was an aristocrat, accustomed to privilege, who had passionate socialist convictions because that was the ideological mainstream thought process across the globe. He was an anglicized product of Harrow and Cambridge who spent over 10 years in British jails in India. So, this contrast, the paradox ridden Jawaharlal Nehru. He was an agnostic radical who became an unlikely protege of the saintly Mahatma Gandhi. And with these things, the paradox-ridden Jawaharlal Nehru was India for the first 17 years of India's independence. And if we just try to summarize upon the principal pillars what we can accord to Nehru's legacy to India, and perhaps in 2025, 62 years after his demise, we really a lot of this legacy has all of a sudden come to a pertinence because of the kind of geostrategic climate India has come to. So one was the democratic institution building. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was a idealist Democrat at heart. Otherwise, we can see that post the World War II, whatever nations got on the planet, the modern democracies and things like that, so they could have curbed a lot of democratic spirit. So he was a democratic institution builder. He was a staunch pan-Indian secularism. So that spirit of secularism, we will not try to get into the finer nuances of some of the controversial themes, because even within the precept of Hindu Rashtra, even within the vast religion of Sanatan Vedic Arya Hindu Dharma, there are a lot of sampradayas, and until or unless that spirit of mutual acceptance, that spirit of secularism is adopted in some way or the other. Secularism has many, many manifestations on the Indian tapestry, and perhaps 16th of April this very year, when Asim Munir's extremely communal speech, which perpetrated the attack, the Pahalgam attack, the heaven on earth, the land of Kashmir, from which Pandit Nehru got his lineage, ancestral lineage, also from. He was a Kashmiri Pandit. So a lot of history would now get revisited. A lot of interest has to be out there in our young learners, because nations or civilizations for that matter, they really time is a circular one, and perhaps Nehru's legacy has come all over again to be revisited, rethought, uh, and re-indoctrinated into the Indian Republic, because that's how Divya Bhavya Samradh Bharat would be created. That's the collective vision, what we, the people of India, have thought about it. He was a socialist economics at home, and he had a foreign policy of non-alignment, something we would really narrate later on as to how India had to send G7, the seven groups of parliamentarians, to put out the Indian view in the onslaught of the Pakistani terrorism, inevitably somewhere supported by the larger geostrategic players. The way our ceasefire was declared not by our prime minister, but even having a upper hand, the 14th prime minister, it was declared by a head of the nation of a different country for that matter. So somewhere, and no nation on the planet actually came forward to support the Indian view, perhaps. So India has still been vacillating between the various power camps which are emerging. India hosted the G20 summit. That's a circular one. Then a lot of um, uh, localized regional quad, G7, G20, quad, SCO, BRICS, a lot of geostrategic turbulences perhaps happening post the World War II and post Cold War hegemony of the United States of America. So India is perhaps on the cusp, and perhaps the legacy of Nehru, how he withhold, how he got the entire nation, that civilization. We are not a young, we perhaps might be a young republic, a modern republic, but we are an ancient civilization having our own chitti for that matter. And all of these pillars of Nehruvian legacy, they have been integral to a vision of Indianness. How he could withhold the young republic for 17 long years is a saga by itself. And I think all the venom and all the criticism which has gone by, perhaps in an ideological transition, especially the 11 years of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's reign. And incidentally, he took the oath on the eve of Nehru's demise. So, two eras, two epochs, two ideological transformations, because Pandit Atal Bihari Vajpayee, he came from the saffron fold, but then somewhere or the other he was awe inspired by Nehruji himself, and he had seen him, he had interacted with him in the parliament. So he had a bit of a interim kind of approach, a consensual approach for that matter. So the privileged child, we can term Nehru as the unremarkable youth. If you see Nehruvian photographs, the regality is all oozing out from his persona. The posturing young nationalist, a very die-hard nationalist, what Nehru was. See, if you come from a very common, a pauper's family for that matter, living and leading a life of struggle is fine, it is destined. But when you are born with a not just a silver spoon, I would say a platinum spoon, perhaps, the kind of opulence you have, and then you detest it, then you relinquish it, then it matters something out there. And he was a heroic fighter for independence of India, the unchallengeable prime minister, and the peerless global statesman. So these are some of the epithets. So he lived between 14th of November 1889 and 27th of May 1964. Today is 27th of May 2025, and we at Rethink India, under the Prime Ministers of India series, we are commemorating his Punyatithi. And upon Mahatma's assassination, Nehru became the keeper of the Indian national flame, the most visible embodiment of India's struggle for freedom. So, this was Nehru, more than being the first Prime Minister of the Republic of India, the Dominion of India, because from 1947, 15th of August till 26th of uh, January, it was the Dominion of India. Republic only got promulgated on 26th of. So these are the some of the technicalities. So more than being the Prime Minister, he was one of the most visible embodiment of India's struggle for freedom. One of the very prominent figures. So we pay our humble obeisances to the soul of Pandit Nehru, who contributed so much for the Bharatiya Chitti, for the Bharatiya Ganarajya, as we all know about it. And Indian Republic is perhaps truly at the cusp, and the entire Indian nation is aggrieved, agitated, and perhaps we are all taking that leap of faith to regroup, regalvanize our own ideological thought processes and the vision for future. And what we were playing just a little while away ago, his monumental speech, and that keeps on reverberating all through. I will just play it all over again.
The time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not only or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
So, if I'm allowed to use the Nehruvian allegory, at the stroke of midnight, Indian armed forces they avenged the Pahalgam massacre, which was conducted out of an extremely communal Islamic terrorist approach. And we really rose when the world was sleeping. India really rose all over again, showing her civilizational strength to the entire world. So moving forward, he was an Indian anti-colonial nationalist. Now these terms are so very important because we have to revisit Nehru in order to chalk out a kind of a balanced, a santulit future forward for the Republic of Bharat. He was a secular humanist because he understood well the civilizational complexity what we have in this 32 lakh square kilometers which are left of the Republic of India, but then the larger Akhand Bharat what we all aspire for again has so much of vastness. He was a social democrat and statesman who was a central figure in India during the middle of the 20th century. So, this was the giant of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. We can spit on him, we can try to spit on him, but again, the persona, the legend is like the sun. And who does not have lacunas or weaknesses of life? But then, national heroes are to be cherished, national heroes are to be commemorated because their personas, what is positive in them, we have to really reverberate around that. We have to really co opt that in our own national consciousness and march forward. We don't have to become a kind of continuously criticizing nation without accomplishing something substantive. So, national heroes, we have to really take away the shadows, the eclipses, whatever they might be having out of their own personality, out of their own human weaknesses, but then take out their verve, their drive, the positives, what we can identify in that spirit. We really, from the ages of Rethink India, we really are commemorating, we really are celebrating the life and legend of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. He was the principal leader of the Indian nationalist movement in the 1930s and 1940s. Upon India's independence in 1947, Pandit Nehru served as the country's first prime minister for 16 long years. He promoted parliamentary democracy, secularism, and science and technology during the 1950s. We got the first Indian Institute of Technology in the year 1951. I'm so very privileged to be a part of that illustrious institution, the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. And perhaps I also am an alumnus of, I'm also a kind of a resident of the hostel which is named after Pandit Nehru, the Nehru Hall of Residence. So, somewhere that association rhymes and a kind of a moral responsibility. It beckons on me, perhaps, that from the ages of Rethink India, we should really celebrate and commemorate this legend of modern Indian history. And he powerfully influenced India's arc as a modern nation. In international affairs, Pandit Nehru steered India clear of the two blocks of the Cold War, the fabled non aligned movement, perhaps in the geostrategic circles, in the defense and strategic spaces, whereby we had given up some of the terminology of the non aligned movement, but in essence, somewhere the mandarins at the Ministry of External Affairs, somewhere they felt that we have to have our own pathway forward. and in whatever language, linguistic motives it is being propelled, but the chitti of it all, the spirit of it all is somewhere out here. Pandit Nehru was a well regarded author. He wrote books such as Letters from a Father to His Daughter, and this is something very epochal. How he groomed his own daughter, who also rose to be the prime minister. It is not easy to install your own progeny in a democratic republic as the unquestionable leader. You need to have the mettle, and perhaps after the Operation Sindoor, what was conducted on the midnight of 7th of May, and perhaps the unfortunate ceasefire, which the entire nation is shocked at, and more so on the forefront that it was declared by the head of the state of a third nation. The nation is aghast because whenever and wherever we had taken on the plunge, India has Indian armies, Indian armed forces have been undefeated. There are reasons and I would say rationales for in the early epoch, but then we will all look at it. And his autobiography, 1936, and one of his fabled books, The Discovery of India. Pedantic analysis of this book can really bring about a lot of challenges, but then the core spirit, the way we watch a movie, we try to get the essence of it all. So I think a romantic nationalist was Nehru, was with whatever background he had, the background of privilege, the harrow, the British impact, all that stuff. Perhaps that was not the purest history of India. But then, if we even take his own adage that I would be known as the last English Prime Minister of India, his intentions were pious. And from that vantage, if we look at this giant persona, a lot of things would really fall into perspective. So Pandit Nehru was the son of Motilal Nehru, a prominent lawyer and Indian nationalist. Jawaharlal Nehru was educated in England at Harrow School and Trinity College, Cambridge, as was the parampara of those times of heydays of British Empire, British colonialism on India, when privileged families used to send their wards. Even Sri Aurobindo, the Aurobindo Ghosh, he studied in England. Even the legendary Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, he for his ICS and all, he was there in England. Even Veer Savarkar, tomorrow we would be commemorating his birth anniversary, and he was someone who renamed the first war of Indian independence, which was called as by the British as the mutiny, the Indian mutiny. But then he gave a entirely different notion of the Hindu Rashtra, and somewhere or the other, there is a time of synthesizing the viewpoints of these legends going forward, because they were all patriots, they were all nationalists, they were all so very determined for the cause of Bharat. And we cannot, there might be ideological differences, there might be a lot of matbhed, the approaches to accomplish the same, but perhaps their integrity and their I would say their patriotism just cannot be questioned with whatever ideological spectrum someone belong to. And that is what Rethink India believes in, to champion the entire spectrum, bringing out the positive facets from these historical personalities with the only objective of educating our young learners so that this spirit of Indian nationalism, which is quite widespread, it really gets deeply impregnated, and we really emerge as a Divya, Bhavya, Samradh, an insurmountable nation. The vision, what our current Prime Minister talks about, a Vikasit Bharat, an insurmountable Bharat by 2047. And Pandit Nehru was trained in the law at the Inner Temple. He became a barrister. He returned to India, enrolled at the Allahabad High Court, and gradually became interested in national politics, which eventually became a full time occupation. He joined the Indian National Congress, rose to become the leader of a progressive faction during the 1920s, and eventually of the Congress, receiving the support of Mahatma Gandhi, who looked at Pandit Nehru as his scion, as his political heir, and he who was to designate Nehru as his political heir. As Congress president in 1929, we would be touching that centenary of this declaration. Nehru called for complete independence from the British Raj. So 2047 is far off, but then 2029 is just 4 years hence, and it was in that time Ravi ke tat par, out of one of the five rivers of the Sapta Sindhu, the Indus, whatever is current Pakistan, it used to be an integral part of Bharatvarsha. Nehru called for complete independence from the British Raj, and this memory should not go away from we Bharatvanshis, because the territory of Pakistan, it was a global mayhem out of the Islamic terror mongering, which we have witnessed so very recently. 1923 was the time when Ottoman Empire, it was crushed, and various Islamic nationalities, what we know as of the Organization of Islamic Countries, 57 odd of them. But then this resurfacing of the concept, and there is no harm in having ideological leaning, but it just cannot be developed or built upon on the power of terror. It has to be done on the toil you work upon. You have a fabulous civilization, but you cannot terrorize uh, others who have a different way of life. And that is what is the Indian stand. That is what is the crux of the Bharatiya Adhishthan, as we call it. So Nehru and the Congress dominated Indian politics during the 1930s. Nehru promoted the idea of the secular nation state in the 1937 provincial elections, allowing the Congress to sweep the elections and form governments in several provinces. In September 1939, the Congress ministries resigned to protest Viceroy Lord Lithgow's decision to join the war without consulting them. After the All India Congress Committee's Quit India resolution of 8th August 1942, senior Congress leaders were imprisoned, and for a time the organization was suppressed. Nehru, who had reluctantly heeded Gandhi's call for immediate independence and had desired instead to support the Allied war effort during World War II, came out of a lengthy prison term to a much altered political landscape. Under Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the Muslim League had come to dominate Muslim politics in the interim. In the 1947 provincial elections, Congress won the elections, but the League won all the seats reserved for Muslims, which the British interpreted as a clear mandate for Pakistan in some form. Nehru became the interim Prime Minister of India in September 1946. So it was even before independence. He was the interim Prime Minister of India, and the League joined his government with some hesitancy in October 1947. So one point which will be very important and pertinent, that it is the games which the nations play. India's partition on religious lines was all orchestrated by the British colonialists. Otherwise, it would not have happened. Uh, we had a very elaborate, we had a very intertwined kind of bonhomie in the country, for that matter. 1857, the first war of Indian independence, it was fought collectively. In fact, the commander in chief of Rani Jhansi Bai was a Muslim in nature. So somewhere or the other, these foreign nations, and that is why Nehru becomes pertinent all over again. That if India has to rise as a global superpower, I think we have to go back, read our the lives and thinking of our founding fathers, the way United States of America, they just cannot question their George Washington. They just cannot question their Abraham Lincolns. So why in India we are still in a kind of a kind of a vicious cycle, that we are just trying to malign the reputation of our founding fathers. Every person has a personal side, darker shades, eclipses, but then let's take out what is positive. We will keep on harping Under quotes, I would say this positive, constructive note, because public mind has to be objective in nature. Uh, it has to be gunagrahya. That is how the great nations are built up, uh, in the Committee of Nations for that matter. So, upon India's independence on 15th of August 1947, Nehru gave a critically acclaimed speech, Tryst with Destiny. We all heard the core space of it, and he was sworn in as the Dominion of India's Prime Minister, and he raised the Indian flag at the Red Fort in Delhi. And on January 26th, 1950, when India became a republic within the Commonwealth of Nations, Nehru became a Republic of India's first Prime Minister. He embarked on an ambitious economic, social, and political reform program. Nehru promoted a pluralistic, multi party democracy. In foreign affairs, he led the establishment, the non aligned movement, a group of nations that did not seek membership in the two main ideological blocs of the Cold War. Under Nehru's leadership, the Congress dominated national and state level politics and won elections in 1951, 57, and 62. He died in office from a heart attack in 1964, and his birthday is celebrated as Children's Day in India. The International Children's Day happens to be on 20th November, and every country has a freedom to choose a particular day devoted to one of his luminary figures. So India chose 14th of uh, November, his birthday, as Children's Day. So let's come to his early life and career, uh, spanning from 1889 to 1912. And I would like to invite Dr. Surbhi, the president at Rethink India Institute, to do the honors of narrating Pandit Nehru's birth and family background, a couple of slides. We'll try to cover upon, encapsulate the legend of what Pandit Nehru was in a collective fashion. Dr. Surbi, please. Yeah.
So, on this very pious and austere moment, we would unravel and know more about uh, Nehruji's early life and career, his birth and family, how it all unraveled further. Jawaharlal Nehruji was born on 14th November 1889 in Allahabad in British India to mother Swaroop Rani Nithosu and father Motilal Nehru. Swaroop Rani ji, born in 1868 to 1938. Motilal Nehru ji, his father, 1861 to 1931. Both parents belonged to the community of Kashmiri Pandits or Brahmins, originally from the Kashmir Valley. Motilal ji, a self-made barrister of wealth, served as president of the Indian National Congress in 1919 and 1928. Swaroop Rani ji, raised in a family settled in Lahore, was Motilal ji's second wife, the first having died in childbirth. Jawaharlal was the firstborn. Two sisters followed, the elder of which, Vijaya Lakshmi, became the first female president of the United Nations General Assembly. The younger, Krishna Hoti Singh, became a noted writer, authoring several books on her brother.
So we all know a lot about Vijay Lakshmi Panditji, but the younger sister of Pandit Nehru, Krishna Huti Singh, a little is known, but that's what this Prime Ministers of India series is all about, what we try to commemorate at Rethink India. If we just go through his childhood, Nehru described himself, his childhood, as sheltered and uneventful, even in those imperial times of the British Empire. He grew up in an atmosphere of privilege, nothing hidden for that matter. Like there is a fashion today to talk about that someone, our current Prime Minister, takes no ado that he was born in poverty. So Nehru, on the contrast of it all, he was born in an atmosphere of privilege. So this transparency is just very, very fine, which included life in the mansion Anand Bhavan in Allahabad, which is now, it has been resurrected as Prayagraj. He was educated at home by private governesses and tutors, and one of those was Irishman Ferdinand T. Brooks, who was interested in theosophy. The Irish Home Rule and Indian Home Rule Leaguer, we all know about Annie Besant. She initiated Jawaharlal into the Theosophical Society when he was at a very young age of 13. However, his interest in theosophy was not enduring, and he left the society shortly after Brooks departed as his tutor. Nehru was to write that for nearly 3 years, Brooks was with me, and in many ways he influenced me greatly. Nehru's theosophical interest led him to study the Buddhist and Hindu scriptures, and according to B.R. Nanda, these scriptures were Nehru's first introduction to the religious and cultural heritage of India. They provided Nehru the initial impulse for his long intellectual quest, which culminated in the discovery of India. So we cannot just claim that Nehru's authority on India or India's spiritual or civilizational aspects are so very deep, profound, or Vedantic in nature. Because coming from a kind of anglicized family, and we have just read about the epithets out there, but he is still, for the Indian nation, the kind of love and affection we have. So we have to forgive, we have to overlook some of those outwardly expressions of Jawaharlal Nehru, because even today, if you go, because India was still under the British subjugation, the British mannerisms were all over, so nothing to be so sacrosanct about it, but still he had some inroads into the Indian. What India comprises of, and a lot of it had a lot of British influence, undoubtedly. His youth, Nehru became an ardent nationalist during his youth, and yeah, just a minute, sorry. Please mute whosoever is out there so that it doesn't echo. So, just a moment. So Nehru became an ardent nationalist during his
ये
youth.
बंद कर दो.
The Second Boer War, the Second Boer War and the Russo-Japanese War, it intensified his feelings. So a lot of nationalism came from the Eurocentric perspective, because that was where Pandit Nehru got initiated into, and of the latter, the Russo-Japanese War, which happened. He wrote that the Japanese victories had stirred up my enthusiasm. Nationalistic ideas filled my mind. I mused of Indian freedom and Asiatic freedom from the thraldom of Europe. And later in 1905, when he had begun his institutional schooling at Harrow, a leading school in England, where he was nicknamed as Joe, G.M. Trevelyan's Garibaldi's books, the Italian revolutionary, which he had received as prizes for academic merit, influenced him greatly. So the Eurocentric nationalism was at the heart of Jawaharlal Nehru's Indian nationalism, for that matter. And he viewed Garibaldi as a revolutionary hero. He wrote that visions of similar deeds in India came before of my gallant fight for Indian freedom. And in my mind, India and Italy got strangely mixed together. So, regarding his graduation, Nehru went to Trinity College, Cambridge in October 1907. And so, while India was, we can say so that if we just do a comparative analysis, 1905 was the Bang Bhang, and Sri Aurobindo was the leading figure out there, already a nationalistic icon. And so Nehru was still interning at Harrow as a school student, and 1907 He went to the Trinity College in Cambridge and graduated with an honors degree in natural science in 1910. And during this period, he studied politics, economics, history, and literature with interest. And the writings of Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, Maynard Keynes, Bertrand Russell, Louis Dickinson, and Meredith Townsend, all the leading thinkers and writers of their own time, molded much of his political and economic thinking. So, undoubtedly, he had a lot of strong anglicized background, but the beauty was that he drew it across for the Indian cause. And after completing his degree in 1910, Nehru moved to London and studied law at the Inner Temple, and one of the four inns of courts to which English barristers must belong. So, the Great Britain, what we call it, they have their own great traditions they have tried to develop, and that's why they could rule. The Union Jack could not get down. So, we see a lot of our freedom fighters had a very significant London background, a British background. A lot of these Indian nationalists, they took their learnings from the very British soil for that matter. And during this time, he continued to study Fabian society, scholars including Beatrice Webb, and he was called to the bar in 1912. But then he did not stay put out there. He returned to India in August 1912, and Nehru enrolled at the Allahabad High Court, which was still obviously the British mannerisms. It was all the British judiciary at that time. And he tried to settle down as a barrister. His father was one of the wealthiest barristers in British India, with a monthly income exceeding rupees 10,000, a whopping sum of those times. And although Nehru was expected to inherit the family's lucrative practice, he had little interest in his profession and relished neither the practice of law nor the company of lawyers. So the typical, we can say, so the privileged one, no, I have to do something different. He had a fire, a yearning differently. And his involvement in nationalist politics was to gradually replace his legal practice. But then, when the time came when he was called upon in 1945-46, he was a member of the INA Defense Committee, and during the INA trials, he put on the barrister's gown and appeared in the court after over 25 years. So the training came to assistance, but that was all. And then Nehru's civil rights and home rule, the span of 7 years, the first 7 years of his, I would say, returning back to India epoch. So Nehru's father Motilal was an important moderate leader of the Indian National Congress. The moderates believed that British rule was modernizing and sought reform and more participation in government in cooperation with the British authorities. However, Nehru sympathized with the Congress radicals who promoted Swaraj, Swadesh, and boycott. So the privileged lot, as usual, they said, okay, Bharat Bhagya Vidhata kind of a mindset. So Nehru sympathized with the radicals, and so the two factions actually split in 1907. And after returning to India in 1912, Nehru attended the annual session of the Congress at Patna. The Congress was then considered a party of moderates, or there is a tougher term called mendicants, and elites who were dominated by Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who is also considered to be the political guru of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi when he returned to India in 1915. 1914 or 1915, the 9th of January, which is commemorated as the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. And Nehru was disconcerted by what he saw as very much an English knowing upper class affair, a kind of a gang of privileged lots. So, however, Nehru agreed to raise funds for the ongoing Indian civil rights movement, which was led by Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa. In 1916, Nehru married Kamla Kaul, who came from a Kashmiri Pandit family settled in Delhi. And their only daughter, Indira, was born in 1917. And Kamla gave birth to a son in 1924, but the baby lived for only a few days. So that was a bit of his personal life also as a part of his political life. The influence of moderates it declined after Gokhale died in 1915, and several nationalist leaders they banded together in 1916 under the leadership of Annie Besant and Bal Gangadhar Tilak to voice a demand for Swaraj or self-governance. Besant and Tilak formed separate home rule leagues. Nehru joined both groups, but he worked primarily with Besant, with whom he had a very close relationship since childhood. He became the secretary of Besant's Home Rule League, and in June 1917, the British government arrested Besant. Mahatma Gandhi was yet to arrive on the political scene as the dominant leader of the Indian freedom struggle and the unquestionable leader of the Congress at that point in time. So the Congress and other organizations they threatened to launch protests if she was not freed. The government was forced to release Besant in September, but the protesters successfully negotiated further concessions. So the entire Indian freedom struggle, if we see, it is a very saga in itself, and perhaps going through the personal life stories of legends like Nehru and others, we can really feel and have a great much initiation into what this historic struggle for freedom, the non-violent struggle for freedom, yes, with a lot of other armed resistances, armed invocations, but to delegitimize a kind of imperial colonial empire is a much bigger challenge, and a country of continental complexity. It presents a lot of challenge for armed struggles because India had faced it in 1857. How the British curbed it mercilessly. That's perhaps a story for another session we would be covering as a part of some of our Rethink India sessions. So then, non-cooperation, the Sahyog Andolan, and afterwards, the 1919 and to 1929, the 10 years of it all, Nehru met Gandhi for the first time in 1916 at the Lucknow session of the Congress. So he had the privilege, he was a young lawyer returning back from England, and his father, so he had access everywhere. So, but he had been then dissuaded by his father from being drawn into Gandhi's Satyagraha politics. 1919 marked the beginning of a strong wave of nationalist activity and subsequent government repression that included the Jallianwala Bagh killings. And that was a soul stirring epoch, 13th of April 1919, when both Dyers, one Dyer assuming the role of the governor of Punjab, and the other Dyer who conducted that dastardly massacre of peaceful protesters in that fabled Jallianwala Bagh. So Motilal Nehru lost his belief after the Jallianwala Bagh killings in this constitutional reform, and he joined his son in accepting Gandhi's methods and paramount leadership of the Congress. So in December 1919, Nehru's father was elected president of the Indian National Congress in what is regarded as the first Gandhi Congress. Gandhi had to struggle for a couple of years after his return from South Africa. And 7th of June, we will be commemorating that very historic day when Gandhi was thrown out on way to Pretoria at the Peter Maritzburg station. That very legendary night, yet another night, momentous night, which ignited, and that happened in the year 1893. So again, a lot of parallels in history we just can go. It really becomes a very enigmatic learning. So during the non-cooperation movement launched by Gandhi in 1920, Nehru played an influential role in directing political activities in the United Provinces, which is now the Uttar Pradesh, as provincial Congress secretary. He was imprisoned on 6th December 1921 on charges of anti-governmental activities, making the first of 8 periods of detention between 1921 and 1945. So एक illustrious lawyer होने के बावजूद एक freedom struggle, एक freedom fighter, 8 times he was incarcerated into jails. Critics have a lot of funny things that, oh, his jails were so comforting and all that stuff. So he was not a criminal, he was just a political prisoner. So that comparison has to be brought about. And yes, Nehru had not advocated for an armed rebel, and perhaps the Britishers were a bit moderate towards him, while Savarkar, he was on the extreme armed rebellion and things like that. So he was sent to Kalapani, and that's a parallel story. And perhaps sometime we would try to draw a parallel between Savarkar and Nehru at some point in time to just see the contrasts as to how things really emerged on the Indian national movement. So he Nehru has spent over 9 years in jail overall, all through. So 9 years of prison. In 1923, Nehru was imprisoned in Nabha, a princely state. It is on the border of current Uttarakhand and Himachal. So when he went there to see the struggle that was being waged by the Sikhs against the corrupt Mahants, he was released after his sentence but unconditionally suspended by the British administrator under the Criminal Procedure Code. And by 1923, Nehru had emerged as a national figure of some stature. He was elected General Secretary of the Congress, President of the United Provincial Congress, and Mayor of Allahabad, all in the same year. So that was all his starting of the political career, starting off emerging as an eminence. The non cooperation movement was halted in 1922 as a result of the Chauri Chaura incident. And Nehru's 2 year term as General Secretary ended after 1925. And earlier that year, he resigned as Mayor of Allahabad due to his disillusionment with municipal politics. Even Subhash Chandra Bose, under C.F. Andrews, he was elected as the Mayor of Calcutta. So, somewhere the politics emerged from bottoms up. A lot of constitutional reforms had happened, and Indians were given a lot of leeway to take on the municipal politics in some way or the other. So in 1926, Nehru left for Europe with his wife and daughter to seek treatment for his wife. We have just read 1917, Indira Gandhi was born and Kamala Nehru had become ill, the maternity issues and all that. So, to seek treatment for his wife, tuberculosis diagnosis. And while in Europe, he was invited to attend the Congress of Oppressed Nationalities in Brussels, Belgium. The whole of Europe was going through a kind of a metamorphosis, new nation states. It was a time between the two world wars. 1919, the First World War had ended, and 1939. So that is what the global politics was emerging. The meeting was called to coordinate and plan a common struggle against imperialism. So, imperialism was a kind of challenge at that point in time, the way terrorism has emerged in the contemporary era. And all, I would say, overemphasized after the Pahalgam massacre, the Pahalgam attack. Nehru represented India and was elected to the Executive Council of the League Against Imperialism, which was born at this meeting. So he got a kind of an international flavor. So non-cooperation movement had been suppressed, and he got a foreign stint out here. And around this time itself, Subhash Chandra Bose, he had resigned from the Indian Civil Services after securing the fourth rank. So Nehru was quite a close friend of Subhash. That's a matter of parallel consideration because, but this is what our leaders were shaping up at that point in time. So Nehru made a statement in favor of complete independence of India at that meeting. He had that very conceptual clarity and ideological conviction for that matter. And Nehru's stay in Europe included a visit to the Soviet Union, which sparked his interest in Marxism and socialism. We all know the 1917 October Revolution, Lenin supremacy, and the kind of transition from the Russian czars to a republic. That was the first communist Marxist kind of thing. It was a kind of a, I would say, fascination in the air. It appealed by its ideas, at least on the theoretical plane, but the practicality came later on. But repelled by some of its tactics. Nehru was not very conversant about the violent tactics, which were a part and parcel of the Marxist and socialist ideologies. And he never completely agreed with Karl Marx's ideas. However, from that time on, the benchmark of his economic view remained Marxist, adapted where necessary to the Indian circumstances. And after returning to India in December 1927, Nehru was elected to another 2 year term as the Congress General Secretary. So, in the space of humanities, in the space of political sciences, all these ideologies have to be essentially parametrized. And we have to somewhere see that which of the parameters which constitute that body of ideology someone ascribed to what extent, because after all it is trials and tribulations, it is all experimentations which emerge. We just cannot throw labels on the face of it all, because it's also again the human behavior is very very complex, and it has to be segmented, parameterized, and moved forward. So, declaration of independence. Nehru was one of the first leaders to demand that the Congress party should resolve to make a complete and explicit break from all ties with the British Empire. He had that confidence because he had that experience, he had seen it all across. So he was the first leaders to demand that. And the Madras session of the Congress in 1927 approved his resolution for independence despite Gandhi's criticism. So, this is very important to see that how, even being an ardent pupil of Mahatma Gandhi, he had his own independent views and tried to push it forward. At that time, he formed the Independence for India League, a pressure group within the Congress. In 1928, Gandhi agreed to Nehru's demands and proposed a resolution that called for the British to grant dominion status to India within 2 years. They gave an ultimatum of 2 years that time. And if the British failed to meet the deadline, the Congress would call upon all Indians to fight for complete independence. Nehru was one of the leaders who objected to the time given to the British. He pressed Gandhi to demand immediate actions from the British. We can understand that Gandhiji was a pupil, a political disciple of Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who was the moderate of his times. So, and being the younger lot, he had an impatience inbuilt somehow. So, Gandhi brokered a further compromise by reducing the time given from 2 years to one. So, that was a kind of an internal movement which was happening. The British rejected demands for dominion status in 1929. It was expected so. And Nehru assumed the presidency of the Congress party during the Lahore session on 29th December 1929. 28th December happens to be the Congress founding day, 1885 AO Hume. So he assumed that party leadership the next day. And he introduced a successful resolution calling for complete independence. And perhaps 4 years down the line, we would be celebrating this very day, perhaps long before 2047. So, Declaration of Independence, the first collective declaration by a formal recognized party. Terrorist activities are on the other side of the story. Bhagat Singh, the other militant movement which were happening. So Nehru drafted the Indian Declaration of Independence. He was a Harrow educated, the Cambridge educated, the educated lawyer. So just see the language. It all draws from the Declaration of the American Independence somewhere or the other. That we believe that it is the inalienable right of the Indian people, as of any other people, to have freedom and to enjoy the fruits of their toil and have the necessities of life, so that they may have full opportunities for growth. We believe also that if any government deprives the people of these rights and oppresses them, the people have a further right to alter it or abolish it. The British government in India has not only deprived the Indian people of their freedom, but has based itself on the exploitation of the masses and has ruined India economically, politically, culturally, and spiritually. We believe, therefore, that India must sever the British connection and attain Poon Swaraj or complete independence. So that was a clarion call. That was a major call what Pandit Nehru gave on the banks of Ravi in Lahore. So Lahore was a very integral part of the Indian independence movement. It was not Pakistan till that point in time. It is the capital of uh, Ram's son Kush, for that matter. So Lahore has a very integral civilizational connect with Bharat. At midnight on New Year's Eve in 1929, again another midnight, a lot of midnights when the world is sleeping, a lot of action has happened in the India's checkered history. Nehru hoisted the tricolor, the tryst with destiny, on 14th August midnight. It had a precursor on the New Year's Eve midnight of 1929 to 30. He hoisted the tricolor flag of India, the Tiranga, upon the banks of Ravi in Lahore. It had a bit of a change, perhaps at that point in time. A pledge of independence was read out, which included a readiness to withhold taxes. The massive gathering of the public attending the ceremony was asked if they agreed with it, and the majority of the people were witnessed raising their hands in approval. 172 Indian members of central and provincial legislatures, they resigned in support of the resolution and in accordance with the Indian public sentiment. The Congress asked the people of India to observe 26th January as Independence Day. And as we have read in our history books, then this is why even after the Constitution was accepted on 26th November 1949, we waited to get it promulgated on 26th January 1950 just to commemorate this very day. Congress, volunteers, nationalists, and the public hoisted the flag of India publicly across India, and plans for massive civil disobedience were also underway. So, if you will not pay the taxes to a government, how it will survive? So, it was a massive precursor to the civil disobedience movement, which was to see the light of the day later on. But focusing on the contributions, the life and legend of Nehru. So, after the Lahore session of the Congress in 1929, Nehru gradually emerged as the paramount leader of the Indian independence movement. It took him a while. Gandhi stepped back more into more of a spiritual role. And although Gandhi did not explicitly designate Nehru as his political heir until 1942, as early as the mid 30s, the country saw Nehru as the natural successor of Gandhi. In 1929, Nehru had already drafted the Fundamental Rights and Economic Policy Resolution that set the government agenda for an independent India. The resolution was ratified in 1931 at the Karachi session, chaired by Vallabhbhai Patel. So India's independence movement had all these important cities of Pakistan, which we all heard during the course of the Operation Sindoor, that uh, our armed forces have annexed them. They have, so that is a different politics. That's a different poisonous part of the Indian freedom struggle, which was all orchestrated by the global powers to have their natural sway, because if the conflicts remain, they only benefit out of that. So, coming to the Salt March of 1930, Nehru and most of the Congress leaders. So, this 1929 Ravi Tat par jo declaration hua of complete independence, it has to then manifest into multiple programs, a constant agitation, and that was all led by Nehru. And most of the Congress leaders were ambivalent initially about Gandhi's plan to begin civil disobedience. So, after the failure of the non cooperation movement because of Chauri Chaura, and Gandhi also emerged more mature. So, with a satyagraha aimed at the British salt tax. So, after the protest had gathered steam, they realized the power of salt as a symbol. Nehru remarked about the unprecedented popular response. It seemed as though a spring had been suddenly released. So he was arrested on 14th of April 1930 while on a train from Allahabad to Raipur. Earlier, after addressing a huge meeting and leading a vast procession, he had ceremoniously manufactured some contraband salt. So, salt was considered, British had the entire monopoly over salt at that point in time, and he was charged with breach of the salt law and sentenced to 6 months of imprisonment at Central Jail. So, one of the 9 years of his jail tenure, 8 times, as we have just read it. So he nominated Gandhi to succeed him as the Congress president during his absence in jail. But Gandhi declined, and Nehru nominated his father as his successor. So Motilal Nehru was the Congress president in 1919 and then in 1930. So with Nehru's arrest, the civil disobedience movement, it acquired a new tempo, and arrests, firing on crowds, and lathi charges grew to be ordinary occurrences. So the Dandi March was perhaps a consequent of this Nehru's arrest. He had resumed that young Turk figure out there. So Salt Satyagraha was a great success. Nothing uh, unfortunate happened like Chauri Chaura massacre. Chauri Chaura, we all know that an agitated crowd had gone out of bounds and they had burnt a police station alive with the policemen inside. So that was something which would have uh, dastardly repercussions, and that's why Gandhi withdrew unconditionally the entire movement at that point in time. So the salt satyagraha, a pressure of reform through passive resistance, succeeded in attracting world attention. A creative way, a passive resistance, how an oppressed people can really challenge the might of a global empire at that point in time. And perhaps India is looking at such creative mechanisms in the wake of American interference into the Indian national sovereign affairs, especially in Operation Sindoor and others. The kind of tariff war which is happening, perhaps a new imperialistic order is happening, and a lot of things we can learn from this checkered history of ours. So, Indian, British, and world opinion increasingly recognized the legitimacy of the claims by the Congress party for independence. Nehru considered the Salt Satyagraha the high water mark of his association with Gandhi. So, till 1919, the non cooperation movement, Nehru was still an apprentice. But somewhere, what we are seeing this is that he was the core architect of it all because he authored that Declaration of Indian Independence, and such was his samarpan to his mentor that he remained on the backside and tried to steer it through. So, and Nehru felt that its lasting importance was in changing the attitudes of Indians. So, of course, these movements exercised tremendous pressure on the British government and shook the government machinery. But the real importance, to my mind, lay in the effect they had on our own people and especially the village masses. Non cooperation dragged them out of the mire and gave them self respect and self reliance. They acted courageously and did not submit so easily to unjust oppression. Their outlook widened as they began to think a little in terms of India as a whole. It was a remarkable transformation, and the Congress, under Gandhi's leadership, must have the credit for it. So this was an epochal movement, and we all know that how the roundtable conferences and all were convened in London about India's demand for independence. It all started in 1929, that epochal day of 29 December 1929. We should all keep on remembering and reminding ourselves. So soon after, he was incarcerated 1930 to 1935 in prison. So on 11th October 1930, Nehru's detention ended, the 6 month detention. But he was back in jail in less than 10 days for resuming the presidency of the banned Congress. On 26th January 1931, Nehru and other prisoners were released early by Lord Irwin, who was negotiating with Gandhi. His father died on 6th February 1931. He could not he could not take the toll of his son being incarcerated in the central jail, Allahabad. So Nehru was back in jail on 26 December 1931 after violating court orders not to leave Allahabad while leading a no rent campaign to alleviate peasant distress. On 30th August 1933, Nehru was released from prison, but the government soon moved to detain him again. On 22nd December 1933, the Home Secretary sent a memo to all local governments in India. The government of India regard Nehru as by far the most dangerous element at large in India, and their view is that the time has come, in accordance with the general policy of taking steps at an early stage to prevent attempts to work up mass agitation to take action against him. So here we would take a small pause and tell that a non-violent agitator, a political agitator who is talking in very normal, I would say a well-educated one, but he's considered to be the most dangerous element as compared to the militants or terror mongering part of the Indian freedom fighters. Those we have ample reverence and respect towards. That was their own mechanism, because these non-violent structural means, they were demolishing the entire edifice of the British Empire. So if you commit an act of violence against one government official, it just ends over there. But if you direct your energies towards a structural fix, howsoever the ruling disposition might not be liking it, but then it has a cascading impact. And at the end of the day, whatever power transition has to happen, the reins of power from the British colonialist to be transferred, a structure is required. So that is why the non-violent, the positive, the proactive struggle, it had a legitimacy. It got us freedom, and that has been always in the Indic pantheon. It was a Prahalada who had silently transitioned the powers out there. So this was so very the part of uh, Nehru. He was arrested in Allahabad on 12th January 1934, and in August 1934, he was briefly released for 11 days to attend to his wife's ailing health. And in October, he was allowed to see her again, uh, but he turned down an early release conditional on withdrawing from politics for the duration of his sentence. Uh, then the epoch of 1935 to 1939, Congress president provincial elections in September 1935, Nehru's wife Kamla became terminally ill while receiving medical treatment in Baden-Württemberg, Germany. Nehru was released from prison early on compassionate grounds and moved his wife to a sanatorium in Lausanne, Switzerland, where she died on 28th February 1936. So while in Europe, Nehru learned that he was elected as Congress president for the coming year. He returned to India in March 1936 and led the Congress response to the Government of India Act 1935. He condemned the act as a new charter of bondage and machine with strong brakes but no engine. He initially wanted to boycott the 1937 provincial elections but agreed to lead the election campaign after receiving vague assurances about abstentionism. Yeah, we are sorry for our power failure. It just happened. So let's come back again. Uh, so Nehru returned to India in March 1936 after the demise of his wife, and he led the Congress response to the Government of India Act 1935, which he condemned as an act which has a charter of bondage. He said that it's a machine with strong brakes but no engine. He initially wanted to boycott the 1937 provincial elections but agreed to lead the election campaign after receiving vague assurances about abstentionism from the party leaders who wished to contest. And Nehru hoped to treat the election campaign as a mass outreach program. So during the campaign, Nehru was elected to another term as the Congress president. Just to give a continuity, that is what it happened. And the election manifesto, it was drafted largely by Nehru, attacked both the Act, the Government of India Act 1935, and the communal award that went with it. He campaigned against the Muslim League and argued, uh, just a moment, yeah. And argued that Muslims could not be regarded as a separate nation. So, after the 1909 conspiracy of the earlier viceroys, they all came back with the Muslim award, with the kind of a two nation theory. It was all orchestrated by the British to rein in the Indian national sentiment and argued that Muslims could not be regarded as a separate nation. The Congress won most of the general seats, and the Muslim League fared poorly with Muslim electorates. After the elections, Nehru drafted a resolution against taking office, but there were many Congress leaders who wanted to assume power under the 1935 Act. And the Congress Working Committee under Gandhi passed a compromise resolution that authorized office acceptance but reiterated that the fundamental objective of the Congress was the destruction of the 1935 Act. Nehru was more popular than before with the public, but he found himself isolated at the CWC meetings due to the anti socialist orientation of its membership. Gandhi had to personally intervene when a group of CWC members and Nehru threatened to resign and counter resign their posts over disagreements. He became discontented with his role, especially after the death of his mother in January 1938. So, two uh, casualties in the house, first of his wife and then his mother. So, it was quite an emotional shock for Nehru, as we can see. And in February 1938, He did not stand for re-election as the president, and he was succeeded. This is the Haripura Congress, the legendary Haripura Congress, and he was succeeded by his comrade Subhash Chandra Bose. He left for Europe in June, and then stopping on the way at Alexandria, Egypt. While in Europe, Nehru became very concerned. It was just a year before the Second World War broke. He was very concerned with the possibility of another world war. At that time, uh, yeah, just a moment. Yeah, sorry. So at that time, he emphasized that in the event of war, India's place was alongside the democracies. Though he insisted India could only fight in support of Great Britain and France as a free country. But after returning to India in December 1938, Nehru accepted Bose's offer to head the planning commission. So a lot of uh, construction. It was very clear that India would be gaining independence sooner than later. So a lot of post-independence activities had started happening, and Bose, as we know, that he had a great thought process about creating a planning commission. We also have an idea that how the Moksha Gundam Vishweshwarya was to head the first planning commission, but the political idea was of Bose and Nehru combined. So in February 1939, he became president of the All India States People's Conference, which was leading popular agitations in princely states. Nehru was not directly involved in the events that split the Congress during the Bose presidency and unsuccessfully attempted to mediate. The epoch of 1939 to 47, the next epoch, when the Second World War erupted and then eventual India's independence. So when World War II began, Viceroy Linlithgow unilaterally declared India a belligerent on the side of Britain without consulting the elected Indian representatives. Nehru hurried back from a visit to China, announcing that in a conflict between democracy and fascism, our sympathies must inevitably be on the side of democracy. And I should like India to play its full part and throw all her resources into the struggle for a new order. So, that ideological clarity, and perhaps this is the kind of an ideological clarity we saw in the political opposition of India soon after the Pahalgam attack, and when the entire political opposition said that we will support the ruling establishment to whatever action they have to take against the terrorist state of Pakistan. So, after much deliberation, the Congress under Nehru informed the government that it would cooperate with the British, but on certain conditions. So, from the non cooperation of 1920s to the full cooperation of with the British government, because there was a larger global challenge at hand. So, first, but with conditions. But first, Britain must give an assurance of full independence for India after the war and allow the election of a constituent assembly to frame a new constitution. So, it all started, that transfer of power, it all started off at the start of World War II, and that was, we can see that how Nehru strategized it. He had the helm of affairs of the Congress since 1929 after the declaration of full independence, and then by 1939 he started calling the shots further. So they talked about a constituent assembly because they were not happy with the Government of India Act 1935 for all its reasons. And although the Indian armed forces would remain under the British commander in chief, Indians must be included immediately in the central government and given a chance to share power and responsibility. So it was always a foot forward. We were always advancing our national interests against the British Empire, because a transfer of power is not just a one day wonder. It was a gradual process. It was led by visionaries like Pandit Nehru, who had a global exposure, who had, and more so, a very profound commitment for the Indian national freedom. And when Nehru presented Lord Linlithgow with these demands, he chose to reject them as usual. But then What is imperative and important to understand is that he had that gumption, he had that vision that we have to put forth such demands to advance our national cause. A deadlock was reached. So we can see that Gandhi had started becoming just as an elderly fatherly figure, just to interlocute, just to arrive at certain compromises here and there. And Nehru was the core driver of the entire political movement. So the same old game is played again. Nehru wrote bitterly to Gandhi. The background is the same, the various epithets are the same, and the actors are the same, and the results must be the same. So, but on October 23rd, 1939, the Congress condemned the Viceroy's attitude and called upon the Congress ministries in the various provinces to resign in protest. Before this crucial announcement, Nehru urged Jinnah and the Muslim League to join the protest. But again, as expected, Jinnah declined. So Jinnah's purpose was different. He had his own personal ambitions for that matter. So again, it all went to Lahore in 1940. Why we are commemorating on Nehru's Punyatithi, the entire role plays. This is not history. This is history from the vantage of Pandit Nehru. That even before becoming assuming the reins of power of the Prime Minister of India, this is how he reached to that level. So in March 1940, Muhammad Ali Jinnah passed that what came to be known as the Pakistan Resolution, declaring that Muslims are a nation according to any definition of a nation, and they must have their homelands, their territory, and their state. So it's something, if we can just put up a kind of historical perspective, similar to the General Asim Munir, who is now the Field Marshal of Pakistan, his Kalma Rashtra speech, similarly the Pakistan resolution of Jinnah of March 1940. And this state was to be known as Pakistan, meaning the land of the pure. Nehru angrily declared that all the old problems pale into insignificance before the latest stand taken by the Muslim League leader in Lahore. Lilith Go made Nehru an offer on 8th October 1940, which stated that dominion status was the objective of the British government. So all sorts of puerile, democratic, I would say, diplomacy was all being run even amidst the World War, because the entire theater of the World War was largely in Europe. India was just on the brinks, on the periphery, but then in that space, like the ongoing tariff war, the global tariff wars, and all that stuff, how the geostrategic games are being played. So, however, it referred neither to a date nor a method to accomplish this. So, only Jinnah received something more precise. The British would not contemplate transferring power to a Congress dominated national government, the authority of which was denied by various elements of national life. So British had somewhere made up their mind early on by 1940s that they have to partition the entire Indian subcontinent for that matter. So in October 1940, Gandhi and Nehru, abandoning their original stand of supporting Britain, they decided to launch a limited civil disobedience campaign in which leading advocates of Indian independence were selected to participate one by one. And Nehru was arrested and sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. So on 15th of January 1947, Gandhi stated, "Some say Jawaharlal Nehru and I were estranged. It will require much more than a difference of opinion to estrange us. We had differences from the time we became co workers, and yet I have said for some years and say so now that not Rajaji but Jawaharlal will be my successor." So, this was perhaps the first public declaration when Gandhi declared Nehru to be his successor. And after spending a little more than a year in jail, Nehru was released. along with other Congress prisoners, 3 days before the bombing of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. So this overturned the entire geopolitics at that point in time. And it is very imperative that Indian history has to be seen uh, in the backdrop of the global events, because we are all interconnected, and this is the kind of a paradigm which we at Rethink India we have been advocating and cherishing across our learning communities, what we engage with. So around that time, the INA's attack on British India, the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose led INA and Cripps mission quit India. So when the Japanese supported INA carried their attack through Burma, which is now Myanmar, to the borders of India in the spring of 1942, the British government faced with this new military threat, and they decided to make some overtures to India. So while Nehru was championing the cause of political freedom from within the country, Subhash was leading it from outside, and that was a fabulous. Again, it's a matter of another session over here, but that terrified the entire British people, because after 1857, no such kind of very prudent military attack was made to gain the political independence of the country. So, and Nehru had originally desired, they relented, because this is how negotiations happen. So, Prime Minister Winston Churchill dispatched Stafford Cripps, who was a member of the war cabinet, who was known to be politically close to Nehru and New Jinnah, with proposals for a settlement of the constitutional problem. As soon as he arrived, he discovered that India was more deeply divided than he had imagined. Nehru, eager for a compromise, was hopeful. Gandhi was not. Jinnah had continued opposing the Congress. Pakistan is our only demand, and by God, we will have it. He declared in the Muslim League newspaper Dawn. Cripps' mission failed as Gandhi would accept nothing less than independence. Relations between Nehru and Gandhi cooled over the latter's refusal to cooperate with the Cripps, but the two later reconciled. So in 1942, Gandhi called on the British to leave India. Gandhi had got restless. He had come out of age, and we all understand that how this complication started taking over. And both Nehru and Patel had immense respect for Gandhi. So that is what is said in historical parlance, is that it is time for giving over the reins in a timely fashion, so that the young and the experienced ones whom you only have mentored can take on the reins of power and transition it. Otherwise, it all ends up as we all saw the bloody partition, what we witnessed. Perhaps it could have been averted. That's a matter of another session for that matter. And Nehru, though reluctant to embrace the Allied war effort, he understood the complications in which Britishers were, and he had no alternative, because Gandhi had pushed for it, and he could not question the authority. So he had no alternative but to join Gandhi. And following the Quit India resolution passed by the Congress Party in Bombay on 8th August 1942, the entire Congress Working Committee, including Gandhi and Nehru, was arrested and imprisoned. And most of the Congress Working Committee, including Nehru, Abdul Kalam Azad, and Sardar Patel, were incarcerated at the Ahmedgarh fort until 15th June 1945. So just the close of the World War II, they were all incarcerated from 42 to 45. So it was a complete lull over there. The impatient push of Mahatma Gandhi. So during the period when all the Congress leaders were in jail, the Muslim League under Jinnah, they grew in power. So that was a tactical, a strategic mistake. They had earlier given their cooperation to the Britishers, and Britishers had relented. So we have to see this entire course of history. And Nehru was prudent. He knew that we have to hold on at that point in time, but then he relented. So in April 1943, the League captured the governments of Bengal, and a month later that of the Northwest Frontier Province. In none of these provinces had the League previously had a majority only, Only the arrest of Congress members made it possible. With all the Muslim dominated provinces except Punjab under Jinnah's control, the concept of a separate Muslim state was turning into a reality. They got a field run, they got a home run to drumbeat their demand for Pakistan. However, by 1944, Jinnah's power and prestige were waning, but still they had a open field. So, a great sympathy towards the jailed Congress leaders was developing among Muslims, and much of the blame for the disastrous Bengal famine of 1943 44, during which 2 million people died, had been laid on the shoulders of the province's Muslim League government. And the numbers at Jinnah's meetings, once counted in thousands, soon numbered only a few hundred. And as we can see, so that even after 75 years, Pakistan is a beggar Islamic Republic of Pakistan. It mustered out of becoming a nuisance element in the Committee of Nations by getting an IMF loan. But just see, look at its economy, look at its social structure. So it was all created as a matter of hate, and just see what it is today. Had it not been a peacekeeping effort, I think Indian armed forces would have dismembered Pakistan into smithereens as a part of the Operation Sindoor. So, in despair, Jinnah left the political scene for a stay in Kashmir. His prestige was restored unwittingly by Gandhi, who had been released from prison on medical grounds in May 1944 and had met Jinnah in Bombay in September. So, again, a tactical mistake by Gandhi. There, he offered the Muslim leader a plebiscite in the Muslim areas after the war to see whether they wanted to separate from the rest of India. So, a respite was given. Jinnah had went into political oblivion and Gandhi resurrected him. Essentially, it was an acceptance of the principle of Pakistan, but not in so many words. So Jinnah demanded that the exact words be used. Gandhi refused, and the talks broke down. Jinnah, however, had greatly strengthened his own position and that of the League. The most influential member of the Congress had been seen to negotiate with him on equal terms. So, and it was all because Nehru was in prison. He could not intervene. He could not sway Gandhi not to indulge with Jinnah. And we can see the fate of the nation out here. So, cabinet mission and interim government of 1946 1947. Nehru and his colleagues were released prior to the arrival of the British 1946 cabinet mission to India. It was soon after the end of the World War II, to propose plans for the transfer of power. The agreed plan in 1946 led to the elections in the provincial assemblies, and in turn, the members of the assemblies elected members of the Constituent Assembly. Uh, Congress won the majority of the seats in the assembly and headed the interim government with Nehru as the prime minister. The Muslim League joined the government later with Liaquat Ali Khan as the finance member. So Nehru served as prime minister for 16 years, initially as the interim prime minister, then from 1947 as the prime minister of the Dominion of India, and then from 1950 onwards as the prime minister of the Republic of India. So he furthered the entire idea of republicanism. Nehru showed his concern for the princely states of South Asia since 1920s. And during his presidential address at the Lahore session, he was such a visionary from that early on times. Nehru had declared that the Indian states cannot live apart from the rest of India, and their rulers must, unless they accept their inevitable limitations, go the way of others like them. So, in July 1946, Nehru pointedly observed that no princely state could prevail militarily against the army of independent India. In January 1947, he said that independent India would not accept the divine right of kings. In May 1947, he declared that any princely state which refused to join the Constituent Assembly would be treated as an enemy state. Vallabhbhai Patel and VP Menon were more conciliatory towards the princess, and as the men charged with integrating the states was successful in the task. During the drafting of the Indian Constitution, many Indian leaders, except Nehru, were in favor of allowing each princely state or covenanting state to be independent as a federal state along the lines suggested originally by the government of India at 1935. Nehru did not fall into that trap. This point needs to be taken into account. But as the drafting of the constitution progressed and the idea of forming a republic took concrete step, it was decided that all the princely states or covenanting states would merge with the Indian Republic. So, very, very important part. Since 1929, Nehru had put this thing, and he, out of his charisma, his verve, his energy, he could take it all as a principle of republicanism. And in 1963, Nehru brought in legislation, it was a year before his demise, making it illegal to demand secession. And he introduced the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, which makes it necessary for those running for office to take an oath that says that I will uphold the sovereignty and integrity of India. So it is not an exaggeration to say that Nehru was the nation builder. The nation builder Nehru, whose 62nd Punyatithi we are all commemorating on 27th May 2025. And we can see that this is the kind of uh, a great contribution which legends like Nehru have really brought about. And it all comes with the power of hindsight when we look at things in a circular fashion. Independence, Dominion of India, 1947 to 1950. This phase, the period before independence in early 1947 was impaired by outbreaks of communal violence. Jinnah had given the call for direct actions all across, and political disorder was there, and the opposition of the Muslim League led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who were demanding a separate Muslim state of Pakistan. So Nehru took office as the Prime Minister of India on 15th August and delivered his inaugural address amidst such a mayhem, in such a romantic fashion. Perhaps it is one of the most romantic speeches in the history of humankind, in the history of modern democracies who have earned their political freedom out of a popular freedom struggle. And just see the vision he set out, that long years ago we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A moment comes, which comes but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends, and when the soul of a nation, long suppressed, finds utterance. It is fitting that at this solemn moment we take the pledge of dedication to the service of India and her people, and to the still larger cause of humanity. So the human socialist, what Nehru was, he could express that at that point of transfer of power, taking his oath as the Prime Minister of the Dominion of India. The other challenge what India faced, whatever idiosyncrasies Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi might have, but he was successful in mobilizing the entire consciousness of the Indian people at large by his fakir approach. He was again a London educated barrister, and he had a phenomenal success. of his method of satyagraha in South Africa, and he gave that inspiration to the Indians that the Satyagraha and all that. So assassination of Mahatma Gandhi was a great turmoil in a Rashtra, in a recently independent country. So on 30th January 1948, Gandhi was shot while he was walking in the garden of Birla House on his way to address a prayer meeting. And the assassin was none other than Nathuram Godse, who was a Hindu nationalist with links to the extremist Hindu Mahasabha party, and who held Gandhi responsible for weakening India by insisting upon a payment to Pakistan. Some 55 crores were to be given to Pakistan as a part of the settlement of partition, but then Nehru and Patel were against that. Pakistan would use it, and it is the same time when Pakistan had invaded the POK, and nefariously it had taken it over. That was a parallel theater happening, but then Gandhi, as usual, to his stubborn tactic, had uh, went on to a satyagraha that no, this money has to be given. But then real politics doesn't happen that way. So that assassination happened. Both sides have their own. Nathuram Godse has this elaborate defense that why I killed Gandhi. It is quite a elaborate speech, quite a elaborate statement. So politics of the day is very, very complex. We just cannot have binary, the good or bad part of it all. It's a very complex n-dimensional spectrum where we have to really evaluate the various parameters, and at the end of the day, the only driving tool, the operating word can be the larger national interest. So we have to keep the judgments away and just witness the incidents, the plots of it all. We just cannot judge them all into the binary buckets. So Nehru gave a very touching speech. He addressed the nation by radio because that was the technology of that day. Friends and comrades, the light has gone out of our lives and there is darkness everywhere. And I do not quite know what to tell you or how to say it. Our beloved leader, Bapu as we called him, the father of the nation, is no more. Perhaps I am wrong to say that. Nevertheless, we will not see him again as we have seen him for these many years. We will not run to him for advice or seek solace from him. And that is a terrible blow, not only for me, but for millions and millions in this country. So Nehru was very uh, balanced, stable. He did not articulate a kind of a jingoistic speech, even if a kind of an assassination attempt has been made, just to keep the poise and calm across. And Yasmin Khan argued, one of the scholars, that Gandhi's death and funeral helped consolidate the authority of the new Indian state under Nehru and Patel. Somewhere or the other, Gandhiji, in his last moments, the assassination was tragic, but then he had indirectly tried to capture upon India's rise, India's move first by rekindling Jinnah's ambitions all over again for Pakistan, and then all these affairs uh, he involved himself into. And the Congress tightly controlled the epic public display of grief over a 2 week period funeral, mortuary rituals, and distribution of the martyrs' ashes, with millions participating in different events. In fact, as we have read that since 1929, Gandhi had gone to oblivion and more of a spiritual advisor, but then he was a great mascot of of a torn एंशियंट सिविलाइजेशन बिकॉज भारत की जो स्थिति थी ब्रिटिश राज के अंतर्गत एक छिन्न भिन्न तो गांधी केम एज अ यूनिफाइंग स्पिरिचुअल फोर्स एंड अंडर हिज ennobling influence the entire country could get mobilized for mass action. A tethered nation which was all broken from all across, it was a tough thing. So that was what Gandhi was, the father of the nation. So the goal was to assert the power of the government. It was all real politic of Nehru and Patel, legitimize the Congress party's control and suppress all religious paramilitary groups. Nehru and Patel suppressed the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which was exonerated later on from having any official role from Gandhiji's assassination. But then they used their political power, the official power, to suppress RSS, the Muslim National Guards, and the Kaksars. Somewhere or the other, the tragic partition, the bloodbath which was happening, somewhere it got controlled because Gandhi took that bullet on his own chest with around 2,200,000 arrests. So Gandhi's death and funeral linked the distant state with the Indian people and helped them to understand the need to suppress religious parties during the transition to independence for the Indian people. In later years, there emerged a revisionist school of history which has sought to blame Nehru for the partition of India, mostly referring to his highly centralized policies for an independent India in 1947, which Jinnah opposed in favor of a more decentralized India. Perhaps 62 years hence, 6 decades plus and counting, perhaps it's a time to revisit Nehru. The revisionist theories find Nehru has been given enough blame in these last 11 years, especially, but perhaps from the contemporary geostrategic complications which we in India are facing, where we have no friend at all in Operation Sindoor, apart from we can say proverbial Talibanis and the Israelis. Perhaps we did not get any support from any other country, and that was the reason that Prime Minister Modi had to rush and the entire G7 to trumpet the message and mission of India. And we are again on that precipice, again on that complex situation, what we were at 1947. Perhaps the time is coming in a circular fashion, and there's a lot to learn from Nehru, and Nehru has to be reinterpreted in the contemporary context. So, integration of states and adoption of the new constitution, the interim period of 1947 to 1950. The British Indian Empire, which included present day India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, was divided into two types of territories: the provinces of British India, which were governed directly by the British officials responsible to the Viceroy of India, and princely states under the rule of local hereditary rulers who recognized British suzerainty in return for local autonomy, in most cases as established by a treaty. Now, between 1947 and about 1950, the territories of the princely states were politically integrated into the Indian Union under Nehru and Patel, and most were merged into existing provinces. Others were organized into new provinces such as Rajputana, Himachal Pradesh, Madhya Bharat, and Vindhya Pradesh, made up of multiple princely states, and a few, including Mysore, Hyderabad, Bhopal, and Bilaspur, became separate provinces. So, those were the early years before the modern Indian Republic was born. The Government of India Act 1935 remained the constitutional law of India, and pending the adoption of a new constitution. So, one thing which is very pertinent to know, that in such a transitory phase, it is a Herculean task. It's a Bhagirathi effort. It's a very, very tough proposition to hold on a new nation when the global Britishers had not gone away as a kind of a relinquishment, as a renunciation. They were driven out for geostrategic reasons largely, and obviously a very popular public movement by which we had taken over the reins of power successively, but then complete independence had to come. And in those transitionary phases, the grit, the I would say the deft which is required to run a country which was on the verge of a civil war, kind of a bloody partition which was happening on religious grounds. I think that's where we have to really admire the leadership of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, that how he tried to keep the reins together. It is very easy to criticize upon, but then when we a kind of a simulation, if we can do in this AI age, if we can do an AI analysis, that what we could have done if I were Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Like there are a lot of contest that if I were the Prime Minister of India, but then which Prime Minister of India? Perhaps at Rethink India, we would try to launch this initiative that if I were Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru or if I were Lal Bahadur Shastri, what would I have done differently? Perhaps in those very circumstances, I think then only the reality, the pragmatism would dawn upon many of us. So in December 1946, Nehru moved the objectives resolution. We say a lot of things about that. Dr. B. Ambedkar was the drafter, was the creator of the Indian Constitution, but historical facts say otherwise. It was B.N. Rao who was classmate of Nehru in Harrow and other places. He was the core brain in drafting it all. Ambedkar was just brought in as an inspirational figure, a figurative head, because Nehru never tried to usurp the entire credit on his own shoulders. He wanted a kind of a democratic spirit that, oh, let have more and more people to be the champions of change, champions of modern India on one count or the other. And that's how a republic, a process driven, a constitutional republic would be born. So the objectives resolution upon Nehru's suggestion ultimately turned into the preamble to the Constitution of India. He was a great writer, author, as we have seen all through his speeches, because in brevity, when you say something, when you express something in such a enigmatic fashion, it really becomes a kind of a treatise, a mantra for for the millions of people who are under that sway. The preamble is considered to be the spirit of the constitution, the new constitution of India, which came into force on 26 January. It made India a sovereign democratic republic, and the new republic was declared as a union of states. Uh, then came the elections of 1952. After the adoption of the constitution on 26 November 1949, the Constituent Assembly continued to act as the interim parliament until new elections. Nehru's interim cabinet consisted of 15 members from diverse communities and parties. The first elections to Indian legislative bodies, it was a parallel elections. National Parliament and the state assemblies under the new constitution were held in 1952. And somewhere or the other, this logic is being perpetrated under the one nation, one election kind of a proposition. But let's see how it falls through. The Congress party under Nehru's leadership won a large majority at both the state and the national level. So 1952 was the time when actually the democratic republic started functioning under the new constitution. So Nehru's tenure, the official tenure, the first elected prime minister of a free India, 1952-57, the first tenure in December 53, Nehru appointed the States Reorganization Commission. So again, the challenge was because initially, whatever the states were brought in, they were just brought in on a lot of compromises, give and take here and there. But 1953, he knew that if India has to really emerge as insurmountable power, we have to really reorganize India on certain fundamental, I would say, chitti of the Indian state. So to prepare for the creation of a state on linguistic lines, because we are a multilingual country, and Nehru had an idea from Europe, where they say that 28 odd nations of the European Union, if they all have to come together in an entity like India, a strong republic, so at least the autonomy has to be on the linguistic lines, because that only encapsulate the culture, the traditions, everything under that. So this commission was headed by Justice Fazal Ali. The commission itself was also known as the Fazal Ali Commission. And Govind Vallabh Pant, the first home minister, the second home minister, and who served as Nehru's home minister from December 1954. After Patel's demise, Nehru needed a very able person. So Govind Vallabh Pant from the land of Kumaon, the valiant Kumaon regiment, so oversaw the commission's efforts, and the commission created a report in 1955 recommending the reorganization of Indian states primarily on linguistic lines. So that was one of his core achievements. And whatever linguistic debates we are witnessing today, perhaps we can learn a lot from Europe for that matter. that linguistic pride is central because that's how it will move on. And in this age of AI driven platforms like Bhashini and all, so the multilingualism can be promoted in a big way. So I think that's a different politics happening, but a lot of solution has to be arrived at where no single language should impose upon, and a kind of a Maitri, the Bharatiya Bhasha Divas, which was initiated very recently on the Janma Jayanti of Subramaniam Bharati ji on 11th of December, is quite a spirit in that direction. So, under the Seventh Amendment, the existing distinction between Part A, Part B, Part C, and Part D states it was abolished. It was a republic in the making, and people lot of criticize that, oh, constitution has been amended for 100 odd times, but then it's a new republic, a very diverse republic. We are not just the United States of America with one language. We are a very, very diverse continental complexity. So we have to analyze India in her own category, and perhaps that is one of the reason that India stands at the cusp of civilizations. India has a hope, and that's what Nehru, the pupil of Gandhi, he tried to take it forward in the Committee of Nations, and India had her own एक विश्व बंधु की जो बात कही है, whatever epithets, even the current prime minister talks about Vishwa Mitra. So India has always been in that aspect. But at the end of the day, we have our own diverse, our own complexities for that matter. So all these states were abolished. They were all known as states. A new type of entity it was introduced. It was called the Union Territory, and it replaced the classification as a Part C or Part D state. Nehru stressed commonality among Indians and promoted pan-Indianism. That was one of his core contributions. He tried to, and he refused to reorganize states on either religious or ethnic lines. He only said that let languages be the only aspect because that's a means of communication, but let not religion or ethnic lines be the determinant of the modern Indian Republic and the states therein. And subsequent elections in 1957 and 62. So these were the three elections in a free India under the new constitution Nehru fought. So in 1957 elections under Nehru's leadership, the Indian National Congress easily won a second term in power, taking 371 of the 494 seats. 552 was to grow later on, and they gained an extra 7 seats. The size of the Lok Sabha had been increased by 5, and their vote share increased from 45% to 47%. So the Indian National Congress won nearly 5 times more votes than the Communist Party, the second largest party at that point in time. And in 1962, Nehru led the Congress to victory with a diminished majority. The numbers who voted for the Communist and Socialist parties grew, although some right wing groups like Bharatiya Jansangh also did well. So, Nehru had from the very head start promoted and supported a multi party democracy because that's how the complexity of a continental nation of India can be encapsulated. 1961, it's yet another very important aspect in Indian history, in Nehruvian history, we can say so. A year before the 1962 China debacle, and after years of failed negotiations, Krishna Menon, who was the defense minister of that point in time, ordered the Indian army to invade Portuguese controlled Portuguese India, which was Goa, in 1961, after which Nehru formally annexed it to India. Nothing doing, just let's make things simple, clear. And it increased the popularity of both in India, but it was criticized by the communist opposition in India for the use of military force. Now, that remains a different ideological tussle on the part of the communists. The Sino-India War of 1962, and a lot of new historical evidences are coming in that how the Indo-Sino-Indian conflict was or still is perpetrated even in the contemporary times by the global powers. Because of India and China, if they can come together, the Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, what Nehru started off, a lot of parallel geopolitics happened. The failure of the Great Leap Forward of Mao, the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis between the superpowers of USSR and USA, and somewhere the USA indoctrinated jumpers in Tibet, the kind of disbelief which happened with the Chinese leadership and all. It all led to this because India had never casted aspersions on the strategic importance of Tibet in the Chinese equation. The way India has never compromised the strategic, the right of India on Kashmir as a principled aspect. So from 1959, in a process that accelerated in 1961, Nehru adopted the forward policy of setting up military outposts in disputed areas of the Sino-Indian border. That was more from our Indian protection, and including 43 outposts in territory which were not previously controlled by India. And China attacked some of these outposts, and the Sino Indian War began, which India somewhat lost. And the war ended with China announcing a unilateral ceasefire and with its forces withdrawing to 20 kilometers behind the line of actual control of 1959. So I think a lot much of this history would now get clearer with more objective facts coming into the play in the contemporary times, and we have to see that how India and China are going to become uh, like how, because China remains the biggest trade partners, and the kind of economic deficit we have, the 2 billion plus nations, India has surpassed becoming the most populous nation on the planet. So a lot of things are there, but the germs and seeds of it are perhaps in our checkered history, the Nehruvian history, we can say so. The war exposed, it is on the critics' part, it exposed the unpreparedness of India's military. India was not prepared, which could send only 14,000 troops to the war zone in opposition to the much larger Chinese army. And we all know that Chinese revolution, the Chinese independence, or the Maoist takeover was in 1949, 2 years after India's independence, was an armed resistance. India was all non-violent one. So we were never ever at par in some way or the other. So Nehru was widely criticized for his government's insufficient attention to defense. And in response, Defense Minister V.K. Krishna Menon resigned, and Nehru sought uh, US military aid at that point in time. And Nehru's improved relationships with the US under John F. Kennedy, it proved useful during the war, as in 1962, the president of Pakistan, then closely aligned with the Americans, Ayub Khan, he was made to guarantee his neutrality regarding India, threatened by communist aggression from Red China. India's relationship with the Soviet Union, criticized by right wing groups supporting free market policies, was also seemingly validated. Nehru would continue to maintain his commitment to the non aligned movement despite calls from some to settle down on one permanent ally. So, this was kind of an entrapment which was built up for Nehru, as we can see so in the post Operation Sindoor kind of diplomatic entrapment of India, for that matter. So I think these two parallels would be reviewed by scholars and defense and strategic efforts, because how the global powers operate, because Nehru was a rising star. He had created a kind of a third block of independent nations, the way India has been doing in the last 11 years under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. But all of a sudden, after the emergence of President Trump on the American scene, the kind of geostrategic moves which have been going on, I think a lot of material has now come, and India has to really move forward very smartly, and learning from the past experiences, for that matter. And the unpreparedness of the army was blamed on Defense Minister Menon, who resigned from his government post to allow for someone who might modernize India's military further. India's policy of weaponization using indigenous sources and self sufficiency began in earnest under Nehru, but then it was just hardly 20 years of independent India. So the whole geopolitical contours had been redrawn. So it was a uphill task already. So this task was then done, like 1965 we defeated Pakistan. Then 1971 was a great victory for Indian armed forces. That was all done subsequently. We recouped very fast. from this Sino-Indian debacle. And toward the end of the war, India had increased her support for Tibetan refugees and revolutionaries. Some of them having settled in India as they were fighting the same common enemy in the region. Nehru ordered the raising of an elite Indian trained Tibetan armed forces composed of Tibetan refugees, which served with distinction in future wars against Pakistan in 65 and 71. Nehru's popularity, till date, Nehru is considered the most popular prime minister, both on the positive and the negative side of it all. Whatever happens, even in contemporary India, there is a strong intellectual section which eulogizes the principled position, the romanticized principled positions of Nehru. Though it did not have the practical implications, Nehru was way better off than Gandhi, for that matter, who complicated Indian, I would say, movements. And on the critique side of it all, that whenever you don't find any resolution, just pass on the blame to Nehru, because being the first prime minister and gone for 62 long years, he can always be blamed for whatever challenges we face as a modern nation. He won three consecutive elections with around 45% of the vote. This is quite a substantive number. At the height of it all, Prime Minister Narendra Modi could only poll 37.7% when he touched upon the 303 mark. But then, obviously, the numbers of the electorate have risen significantly. But as a percentage, I think Nehru's record has never been surpassed, for that matter. A Pathé News archive video reporting Nehru's death remarks, neither on the political stage nor in moral stature was his leadership ever challenged. So it all came not from his being the prime minister, it all came from being the preeminent freedom fighter, the leader of the Indian freedom movement from 1929 onwards. I think that is important. And in his book, Verdicts on Nehru, Ramchandra Guha, the noted historian, he cited a contemporary account that described what Nehru's 1951-52 Indian general election campaign it looked like, because it was a new era. So almost at every place, city, town, village, or wayside halt, that was not an era of 3D holograms and social media or 24 cross 7 cable television and all and all. People had waited overnight to welcome the nation's leader. Schools and shops closed. Milkmaids and cowherds had taken a holiday. The Kisan and his helpmate took a temporary respite from their dawn to dusk program of hard work in field and home. In Nehru's name, stocks of soda and lemonade sold out. Even water became scarce. Special trains were run from out of the way places to carry people to Nehru's meetings, enthusiasts traveling not only on footboards but also on top of carriages. Scores of people fainted in milling crowd. So in the 1950s, Nehru was admired by world leaders such as British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and US President Eisenhower. A letter from Eisenhower to Nehru dated 27 November 1958 read that universally you are recognized as one of the most powerful influences for peace and conciliation in the world. I believe that because you are a world leader for peace in your individual capacity, as well as a representative of the largest neutral nation. So that was the power what Nehru assumed because of his, by dint of his elaborate experience, as we have seen in his own note that Europe, he was quite well versed with the mind plays, and then his entire education, his entire understanding of the European nationalism. And in 1955, Churchill called Nehru the light of Asia and a greater light than Gautam Buddha. So these kind of political peons have their own, they can all be taken on with a pinch of salt, because at the end of the day, 1962, we saw that how the geopolitical powers, they attacked India in a way, the way we saw the play that IMF, it during the very course of Pakistani terror on India, IMF, led by these great word powers, they sanctioned a whopping loan of $1 billion, and so we have to take these praises. But then this is the kind of the stature which the Prime Minister of India has, the highest political office, has always enjoyed in the Committee of Nations. So Nehru is time and again described as a charismatic leader with a rare charm. Let's come to some of his vision and governing policies. According to Bhikhu Parekh, Nehru can be regarded as the founder of the modern Indian state, the nation builder Nehru. Parekh attributes them to the national philosophy Nehru formulated for India. And these philosophies, these policies, philosophy is central because that is what define the future of a young nation. And for him, modernization was the national philosophy with seven goals: national unity, parliamentary democracy, industrialization, socialism, development of the scientific temper, and non alignment. In Parekh's opinion, the philosophy and the policies that resulted from this benefited a large section of society, such as public sector workers, industrial houses, and middle and upper peasantry. However, it failed to benefit the urban and the rural poor, the unemployed, and the Hindu fundamentalists. Nehru is credited with having prevented civil wars in India, and Nehru convincingly succeeded in secularism and religious harmony, increasing the representation of minorities in the government. So we were a nation which came on bloodbath, on a two nation theory and all. So obviously, not all sections could be catered to in that short term duration. Some of the economic policies which is still, as in Atmanirbhar Bharat, we are still trying to achieve amidst all global mayhem. Nehru implemented policies based on import substitution, industrialization, and he advocated a mixed economy where the government controlled public sector would coexist with the private sector. And he believed the establishment of basic and heavy industry was fundamental to the development and modernization of the Indian economy. And the government therefore directed investments primarily into key public sector industries like steel, iron, coal, and power, promoting their development with subsidies and protectionist policies. Uh, Nehru's vision of an egalitarian society was a cooperative ideal, a one word ideal based on social justice and economic equality. In 1928, Nehru had affirmed that our economic program must aim at the removal of all economic inequalities. Later in 1955, he declared that I also want a classless society in India and the world. And he identified his concept of economic freedom with the country's economic development and material advancement. But then it's all these lofty ideals, aspirational goals, they always need multi generational efforts to transform, and we just cannot put the burden of envisioning and executing at the same time. It really takes a time in such a diverse democracy. And the policy of non alignment during the Cold War, it meant that Nehru received financial and technical support from both power blocks in building India's industrial base from scratch. As we have seen that in the Ukraine Russia conflict, India took the Russian oil, and India has been somewhere trying to balance out the same Nehruvian policy of an arm's length distance from all the power blocks. We have not sat ourselves in any lap, despite the nomenclature difference, but the same policy goes on, and successfully so for that matter. And steel mill complexes were built at Bokaro and Raurkela with assistance from the Soviet Union and West Germany. Like, for example, we did not attend the 9th of May Victory Day in Russia so as not to annoy our Western partners. So we try to keep a kind of a balanced mix even till today. So that way, Nehru's initial trajectory, what he had set out for the nation, goes on. And was substantial industrial development. The industry grew at 7.0% annually between 1950 and 1965, 15 saal, almost trebling industrial output and making India the world's seventh largest industrial country. And we all know that how British had demonetized and highlighted the entire industrial base of country, and there was more of an economic imperialization than perhaps the political one. And whatever investments, whatever designs they brought in, and that's a different story. But then that is how they pauperized the Indian nation in their, I would say, 90 years of the direct rule of the British Crown, and before that, the loot of the East India Company and the drain of India's wealth, what eminents like Dadabhai Nehruji have documented, is something mind boggling. So, with such a baseline in place, amid such complex circumstances of world wars and then a country's cohesion, building a country, building institutions, taking it out, I think that was all credited to Nehru, for that matter, the first Prime Minister of India. And Nehru's critics, we all have them for everyone, however, contended that India's import substitution industrialization, which continued long after Nehru era, weakened the international competitiveness of its manufacturing industries. But then the point remains that uh, India's BrahMos, which annihilated the Pakistani targets. We have seen the logic of this indigenization. Our own BrahMos was terrifically successful, guided by our own Navik system. So I think the philosophical roots what Nehru had seeded in the country, they have paid fruits rather than importing highly expensive military instruments all through. So India's share of world trade fell from 1.4% in 1951 1960 to 0.5% between 1981 and 1990. That is a, a different matter to discuss at a later point, reasons, because the whole global order has got complicated. 1981 to 1990 perhaps was the closure of the Cold War, and a lot of happenings have to be interpreted in that dimension. However, India's export performance is argued to have shown actual sustained improvement over the period, and the volume of exports has grown at an annual rate of 2.9%. So these are all statistics moving forward. GDP and GNP grew substantially. A lot of things, a lot of foundational stuff, it could have grown more. That remains a constant debate. But then seeing the baseline, seeing the circumstances in which the modern Indian Republic, the of continental complexity, how it was born, I think Nehru did a fairly decent job. We can give this credit. Agricultural policies, I think a lot of challenge started happening. We saw that the Great Bengal famine under Jinnah, under the Muslim League government, which killed a lot of people, and it had depopularized the Muslim League policies. So Nehru's leadership, it was driven from socialist ideas, but then government attempted to develop India quickly by embarking on agrarian reforms and rapid industrialization. They wanted to do at both point in time, and we all know that in 100 years, 20 famines had struck in India in the British Empire, and the World War II requirements of food grains, it was very much used from India. So I think uh, a successful land reform was introduced that abolished giant land holdings, but efforts to redistribute land by placing limits on land ownership failed. Attempts to introduce large scale cooperative farming were frustrated by land owning rural elites who formed the core of the powerful right wing of the Congress and had considerable political support in opposing Nehru's efforts. Agricultural production expanded until the early 1960s as additional land was brought under cultivation and some irrigation projects began to have an effect. The establishment of agricultural universities modeled after land grant colleges in the United States contributed to the development of the economy. These universities worked with high yielding varieties of wheat and rice, initially developed in Mexico and the Philippines, that in the 1960s began the Green Revolution, an effort to diversify and increase crop production. At the same time, a series of failed monsoons would cause serious food shortages, despite the steady progress and an increase in agricultural production. So, We all have the food crisis stories under the premiership of Lal Bahadur Shastri ji and all. But then now, 2025, at least on the agricultural forefront, India is by and large a self sufficient country when it comes to food grains. The famine has gone away, and the government has enough grains, surplus grains to feed 80 crore plus people free, with free grains for that matter. So, moving forward, some of the social policies on education. Nehru was a passionate advocate of education for India's children and youth, believing it essential for India's future progress. His government oversaw the establishment of many institutions of higher learning, including the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. We have the great good fortune of having Dr. Surbi as the alumnus of the same. I personally come from the League of the Indian Institutes of Technology, the first one, the IIT Kharagpur, which has in the sweet memory of uh, Pandit Nehru, a Nehru Hall of Residence. I'm both an alumni of the same. The Indian Institutes of Management, the National Institute of Technology. So, a nation builder, an institution builder he was. Nehru also outlined a commitment in his 5 year plans to guarantee free and compulsory primary education to all of India's children. For this purpose, Nehru oversaw the creation of mass village enrollment programs and the construction of thousands of schools. Nehru also launched initiatives such as the provision of free milk and meals to children to fight malnutrition. So, somewhere the midday meal scheme and all that stuff, it somewhere has that welfare aspect. The vision was there, but obviously execution takes time before it sets in. uh, so Hindu code bills and marriage laws, he brought about a lot of reforms to put the country on the same pedestal. We will try to skip it across. A lot of politics happened on that, but then this was the progressive nature. He catapulted the Hindu society at large because Islamic people were more fundamentalist in nature. So somewhere Hindus adopted the more progressive aspects of it by while retaining their own spiritual depth and realms. We will this is again a matter of a different thing. Then language policy, he worked a lot. He was instrumental in getting the reorganization of the Indian states on the linguistic lines. A lot of linguistic compromises. The scientific, the CSTT commission was set out by Nehru as well. So, foreign policy of Nehru has been eulogized. The non alignment policy throughout his long tenure as the prime minister. Nehru also held the portfolio of external affairs. His idealistic approach focused on giving India a leadership position in non alignment. He sought to build support among the newly independent nations of Asia and Africa in opposition to the two hostile superpowers contesting the Cold War. And when India, while hosting the G20 summit at New Delhi, when India made G20 as G21 by getting the entire African Union, the 50 odd nationalities of Africa, the other billion population into the fold. I think Nehruvian vision got a fruition from the 14th Prime Minister of India. The Commonwealth, after independence, Nehru wanted to maintain good relations with Britain and other British Commonwealth countries. And as Prime Minister of the Dominion of India, he acquiesced only after Krishna Menon's redrafting of the 1949 London Declaration, under which India agreed to remain within the Commonwealth of Nations after becoming a republic in January 1950, and to recognize the British monarch as a symbol of free association of its independent member nations, and as such the head of the Commonwealth. The other nations of the Commonwealth recognized India's continuing membership of the association. So, not a very extreme stand, but a gradual tapering down, and it yielded in some way or the other in the initial years of the Indian Republic. The non aligned movement on the international scene, Nehru was an opponent of military action and military alliances like NATO and all. So he was a strong supporter of the United Nations, except when it tried to resolve the Kashmir question. He pioneered the policy of non alignment and co founded the non aligned movement of nations professing neutrality uh, between rival blocs of nations led by the US and USSR. And the term non alignment was coined earlier by V.K. Krishnamenon at the United Nations in 1953 and 54. India recognized the People's Republic of China soon after its founding, while most of the Western Bloc continued relations with Taiwan. Nehru argued for its inclusion in the United Nations and refused to brand the Chinese as the aggressors in the West's conflict with Korea. So, somewhere or the other, Nehru nurtured, and this message needs to be trumpeted with the Chinese as well, who have somehow become an indirect enemy of India for some misunderstandings and Western interference for that matter. So he sought to establish warm and friendly relations with China in 1950 and hoped to act as an intermediary to bridge the gulf and tensions between the communist states and the Western Bloc. Nehru was a key organizer of the Bandung Conference of April 1955, which brought 29 newly independent nations together from Asia and Africa and was designed to galvanize the non aligned movement under Nehru's leadership. He envisioned it as his key leadership opportunity on the world stage, where he would bring together emerging nations. He was one of the key participants in the first summit of the non alignment movement in 1961 in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. As far as the defense and nuclear policy goes, while averse to war, Nehru led the campaigns against Pakistan in Kashmir. He used military force to annex Hyderabad in 1948 and Goa in 1961. So Patel had a role, but then 61 action shows that Nehru's blessings were all out there. While laying the foundation stone of the National Defense Academy, the NDA in Khadakwasla, Pune, in 1949, Nehru stated, "We who for generations had talked about and attempted in everything a peaceful way and practiced non-violence should now be, in a sense, glorifying our army, navy, and air force. It means a lot, though it is odd, yet it simply reflects the oddness of life. Though life is logical, we have to face all contingencies, and unless we are prepared to face them, we will go under. There was no greater Prince of Peace and apostle of non violence than Mahatma Gandhi. But yet, he said it was better to take the sword than to surrender, fail, or run away. We cannot live carefree, assuming that we are safe. Human nature is such. We cannot take the risk and risk our hand hard won freedom. We have to be prepared with all modern defense methods and a well equipped army, navy, and air force. So, 1962 battle, perhaps the resources were not up to that extent. India had to invest a lot over there. So, I think Nehru was not so very oblivious, otherwise, he would not have founded the National Defense Academy in 1949 out of some notion. So we have to evaluate on every forefront with objective facts, which perhaps come with the power of hindsight. Many hailed Nehru for working to diffuse global tensions and the threat of nuclear weapons after the Korean War, the 1950-1953 Korean War. He commissioned the first study of the effects of nuclear explosions on human health and campaigned ceaselessly for the abolition of what he called these frightful engines of destruction. He also had pragmatic reasons for promoting denuclearization, fearing a nuclear arms race would lead to over militarization that would be unaffordable for developing nations such as his own. As far as defending Kashmir goes, at Mountbatten's urging in 1948, Nehru had promised to hold a plebiscite in Kashmir, again a kind of a nefarious British invocation. Under the auspices of UN, Nehru got duped. Kashmir was a disputed territory between India and Pakistan. The two have gone to war over it in 1947. However, as Pakistan failed to pull back troops in accordance with the UN resolution And as Nehru grew increasingly wary of the UN, he declined to hold a plebiscite in 1953. So he never went into the trap completely. He might have been duped, but then he declined to hold a plebiscite in 1953. He probably understood the machinations of these global powers, and his policies on Kashmir and the integration of the state into India were frequently defended before the United Nations by his aide V.K. Krishna Menon. So Kashmir is an integral part of India. It has been the Nehruvian compact also. That's why we still, and thankfully now Kashmir has been completely integrated into to the Union of India after the cessation of some subsections of Article 370. And so in 1953, Nehru orchestrated the ouster and arrest of Sheikh Abdullah, the Prime Minister of Kashmir, whom he had previously supported but was now suspected of harboring separatist ambitions, and Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad replaced him. So he fought hard for Kashmir, and 16th Amendment, as we saw, that the unity and integrity of India, he brought that very constitutional amendment. And Menon was instructed to deliver an unprecedented 8-hour speech defending India's stand on Kashmir in 1957. To date, the speech is the longest ever delivered in the United Nations Security Council. Perhaps we will try to fetch it from the archives and present it to all our community of learners, and covering 5 hours of the 762nd meeting on 23rd January and 2 hours and 48 minutes on the 24th, reportedly concluding with Menon's collapse on the Security Council floor. During the filibuster, Nehru moved swiftly and successfully to consolidate Indian power in Kashmir. Then, under great unrest, Menon's passionate defense of India's sovereignty in Kashmir enlarged his base of support in India and led to the Indian press temporarily dubbing him the hero of Kashmir. So, Nehru was then at the peak of his popularity in India. The only minor criticism came from the far right. So that was some of the historical facts. And on the China forefront, in 1954, Nehru signed with China the Panchashil, the five principles of peaceful coexistence, known in India as the Panchashil. It is a set of principles to govern relations between the two states. Their first formal codification in treaty form was in an agreement between China and India in 1954, which recognized Chinese sovereignty over Tibet. They were enunciated in the preamble to the agreement with the exchange of notes on trade and intercourse between Tibet region of China and India, which were signed at Peking, now Beijing, on 29th April 1954. And negotiations took place in Delhi from December 1953 to April 1954 between the delegations of the People's Republic of China and the delegation of Indian government on the relations between the two countries regarding the disputed territories of Aksai Chin and South Tibet. So by 1957, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai had also persuaded Nehru to accept the Chinese position on Tibet, thus depriving Tibet of a possible ally and of the possibility of receiving military aid from India. So the treaty was disregarded in 1960s, but in the 1970s, the five principles again came to be seen as important in China-India relations and more generally as norms of relations between states. They became widely recognized and accepted throughout the region during the premiership of Indira Gandhi and three-year rule of the Janata Party. Although the five principles of peaceful coexistence were the basis of 1954 Sino-Indian Border Treaty. In later years, Nehru's foreign policy suffered from increasingly Chinese assertiveness over border disputes and his decision to grant asylum to the 14th Dalai Lama, which perhaps created a kind of a trust deficit. As far as United States go, in 1956, Nehru criticized the joint invasion of the Suez Canal by the British, French, and Israelis. His role, both as Indian Prime Minister and a leader of the non aligned movement, was significant. He tried to be even handed between the two sides while vigorously denouncing Anthony Eden and co sponsors of the invasion. Suez Canal is a lifeline of Europe connecting to Asia. Nehru had a powerful ally in the US President Dwight Eisenhower, who, uh, if relatively silent publicly, went to the extent of using America's clout at the International Monetary Fund to make Britain and France back down. Somehow, President Trump, he chose not to intervene this time and allowed this $1 billion loan to Pakistan to fund its terrorist activities in a way. During the Swiss crisis, Nehru's right hand man Menon attempted to persuade a recalcitrant Gamal Nasser to compromise with the West, and he was instrumental in moving Western powers towards an awareness that Nasser might prove willing to compromise. So he was a kind of a peacemaker in that Swiss canal. And with such a strong geopolitical power play, assassination attempts were very natural. They are very rarely in the popular public parlance. There were very various assassination attempts on Nehru. The first one was made during partition in 1947 while he was visiting the northwest frontier province, which is now in Pakistan, in a car. The second attempt came from Babu Rao Lakshman Kochale, a knife wielding rickshaw puller near Nagpur in 1955. The third attempt was a plot by Central Intelligence Agency in 1955. This was around the Swiss crisis. The fourth attempt took place in Bombay in 1956. And the fifth was a failed bombing attack attempt on train tracks in Maharashtra in 1961. But despite threats to his life, Nehru despised having too much security around him and did not like to disrupt traffic because of his movements. But finally, on 27th May 1964, Nehru's health began declining steadily in 1962. It was a big jolt on Nehru. In the spring of 1962, he was affected with a viral infection over which he spent most of April in bed. In the next year, the Cine India skirmish war happened in 1962, October. So in the next year through 1963, he spent months recuperating in Kashmir. Some writers attribute this dramatic decline to his surprise and chagrin over the Sino-Indian War, which he perceived as a betrayal of trust. So Nehru was betrayed time and again, once by Lord Mountbatten to take the Kashmir issue to the newly formed UN, and second was his attempt to have a civilizational connect with China, which betrayed Nehru. Upon his return from Dehradun on 26th May 1964, he was feeling quite comfortable and went to bed at around 11:30 as usual. Uh, he had a restful night until about 6:30. Soon after he returned from the bathroom, Nehru complained of pain in the back. He spoke to the doctors who attended to him for a brief while, and almost immediately he collapsed. He remained unconscious until he died at 13:44 hours on 27th of May. His death was announced in the Lok Sabha at 1400 hours local time on 27 May 1964, and the cause of the death was believed to be by a heart attack. Draped in the Indian national tricolor flag, the body of Jawaharlal Nehru was placed for public viewing. Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram was chanted as the body was placed on the platform. And on 28th May, Nehru was cremated in accordance with Hindu rites at the Shantivan on the banks of Yamuna. It witnessed by around 1.5 million mourners who had flocked into the streets of Delhi and the cremation ground. So this was the enigmatic legend of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and on his death, the US President Lyndon B. Johnson remarked, "History has already recorded his monumental contribution to the molding of a strong and independent India. And yet, it is not just as a leader of India that he has served humanity. Perhaps more than any other world leader, he has given expression to man's yearning for peace. This is the issue of our age. In his fearless pursuit of a world free from war, he has served all humanity. So, this was the life and legend of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister, the longest serving Prime Minister so far. Uh, so, more than being the Prime Minister of the Republic of India, he was the foremost freedom fighter, as we have seen in this short and sweet presentation. And I think the legacy of Nehru would have to be revisited, and perhaps some of the solutions of the contemporary challenges what India faces on the global forefront lies in what Nehru witnessed at the very start of Indian modern republic. We pay all over again our humble obeisances to the departed leader, and the entire purpose behind this Prime Ministers of India series is to create a kind of a objective consciousness devoid of any kind of a bias for that matter, for the young learners to have a very balanced and equipped I would say intellectual acumen to learn नीर शीर विवेक हेतु गुण ग्राह्यता का जो भाव है, because it is very easy to blame upon in posterity, but when time revolves and comes back, I think we have to look back. And Nehru, he continues to be a legend in his own category and continues to inspire the modern Indian Republic. With these words, we'll take your leave from this session, the nation builder Nehru, the commemoration on his 62nd Punyatithi. We hope that this session would come handy to a lot of our learners in empowering themselves and take inspiration in their own personal lives of the life and legend of Nehru.